I need to give you a bit of background for this story to make sense. I grew up in a small town in rural Minnesota where everyone knew each other and nothing much ever happened. Our town had this annual fall festival called Harvest Days, where the whole community would come together for hayrides, pumpkin carving contests, and a big bonfire at night. It was usually pretty tame, just an excuse for folks to socialize and celebrate the end of the farming season. I'd never been much for big crowds or parties, so I usually skipped out on most of the Harvest Days events. But last year was going to be my last one before moving away for college, so when my friends begged me to join them for the bonfire, I figured why not. It was my last chance to experience it, after all. So that crisp October evening, I piled into Jake's beat-up pickup truck with Megan, Tyler, and Kayla. We were all bundled up in flannels and boots, ready for a night of s'mores and spooky stories around the fire. The truck rumbled down the dark country roads as we made our way to old Miller's farm on the edge of town, where they always held the bonfire. When we pulled up, the party was already in full swing. There must have been over 100 people there, which was practically the whole town. A massive bonfire roared in the center of the field, casting flickering shadows across the sea of familiar faces. The air was thick with wood smoke and the sounds of laughter and music. At first, everything seemed normal. We grabbed some hot cider and found a spot near the fire to hang out. People were swapping stories and singing along to the local band playing on a makeshift stage. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something off. Maybe it was the way the shadows danced at the edge of the firelight, or how the laughter sometimes sounded a bit too shrill. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid. That's when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Two older men were talking in hushed voices nearby, and I caught snippets about the ritual and keeping the harvest bountiful. They mentioned something about a sacrifice being needed to ensure next year's crops would be good. I told myself they were probably just joking around, playing up the spooky atmosphere. But the deadly serious looks on their faces said otherwise. I tried to find my friends to tell them what I'd heard, but they'd wandered off into the crowd. As I searched for them, I noticed more and more people giving me strange looks. Their eyes seemed to glint oddly in the firelight, and their smiles were just a little too wide. Panic started to set in as I realized I didn't recognize half the faces around me anymore. Suddenly, the music cut out and an eerie hush fell over the crowd. Mayor Johnson stepped up onto the stage, his usually jovial face now stern and solemn. "Friends and neighbors," he intoned, "the time has come for us to ensure another prosperous year. Who among you will step forward to make the ultimate sacrifice for our community?" 100 pairs of eyes turned to stare directly at me. In that moment, I knew with chilling certainty that I was the outsider, the one who didn't belong, the one they had chosen. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I turned and ran, sprinting blindly into the cornfields surrounding the farm. I could hear shouts and footsteps behind me as I crashed through the dry stalks. My lungs burned and branches whipped at my face, but pure terror kept me going. I don't know how long I ran or how I found my way back to town. The rest of that night is a blur. I remember pounding on doors, trying to get help, but no one would answer. It was like the whole town was in on it. Somehow I made it home and barricaded myself in my room until morning. When the sun came up, everything seemed normal again. My parents acted like nothing had happened, and no one in town mentioned anything about the bonfire. To this day, I don't know if what I experienced was real or some kind of mass hallucination. But I do know that I left for college early and never went back to my hometown again. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the crackle of that bonfire and feel those hungry eyes watching me from the shadows. And every fall, when the harvest moon rises, I wonder what ancient, terrible bargain my little town is making to ensure their crops will grow. I know this all sounds crazy. Maybe I imagined it. Or maybe there's a rational explanation for everything that happened that night. But a part of me will always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run away. What kind of sacrifice were they really planning? And how many others before me weren't lucky enough to escape? I've never told anyone this story before. It sounds too insane, too much like some cliché horror movie plot. But I swear every word of it is true, at least as far as I can remember. Sometimes I think about reaching out to my old friends to see if they remember anything strange about that night. But then I imagine their voices on the phone, a little too cheerful, a little too insistent that I should come back to visit. And I decide it's better not to know. So that's my story. A small town fall festival that turned into something much darker and more sinister. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, most days I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But I do know one thing for certain. I'll never set foot in my hometown again, especially not during harvest season. I guess the moral of the story, if there is one, is to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in movies or campfire tales, but the ones hiding behind friendly faces in your own community. I still love fall, with its colorful leaves and crisp air. But now when I see pumpkins on porches or smell wood smoke on the breeze, there's always a little shiver of dread that comes with it. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that seem the most normal on the surface. So the next time you're at a community event or local festival, take a closer look at the people around you. Watch how they act when they think no one's looking. Listen to the whispers at the edge of the crowd. You might just catch a glimpse of something ancient and hungry lurking beneath the surface of small-town America. Or maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe that night at the bonfire was nothing more than too much hard cider and an overactive imagination. But I'll never know for sure. And in a way, that uncertainty is the scariest part of all. Hello, I'm here with a scary story. And this one comes from an anonymous user. So let's jump right into it. It was September 1944. My dad, who was almost 18, was stationed in Belgium. His job was to locate downed Allied pilots and get them back to safety. The procedure was they would call in their position by radio, and then Dad would go out and find them. He had a Jeep and a driver. One day he got a call that there had been a downed pilot in the area, and he went to investigate. He found the pilot dead. The report said that the pilot had died instantly upon impact with the ground, so he should have been intact. But when my dad approached the body, it was missing its head. The pilot's dog tags were still around his neck, and there was a hole in the sand where the head should have been. Dad said it looked like the pilot had exploded from the inside out. He reported this to headquarters and asked what he should do with the body. They told him to leave it where it was, and they would send someone else to pick it up. When they arrived, though, they were horrified to see that the head was now intact and sitting next to the body. Dad said it looked like somebody had placed the head very carefully next to the body. They sent another message to headquarters asking if they should bury the pilot. Now, headquarters said no. They would send a priest to give him last rites, and then they would be picked up both together. Dad said he understood why some soldiers went crazy in combat. Seeing things like this would make anyone crack up. But before he could get his thoughts together again, the priest arrived. He was very upset, yelling and screaming at headquarters for leaving him in such a state. Then he started muttering to himself, making the sign of the cross repeatedly. Finally, he calmed down enough to perform the last rites. Then, as he was crossing himself, he turned to my dad and said, "The Lord God Almighty has abandoned us. We are on our own. I won't say Mass for you people anymore. You can take your crosses off now." And he took off his own cross and threw it on the ground, breaking it. Then he walked away without a word to anyone. My dad and the others didn't think much more of it until the next morning when they returned to headquarters and told them what had happened. Headquarters said they would look into it. That afternoon, they called my dad into the office. The priest was there, and he was ranting and raving about how the Americans were a lost cause. They had given up on God. He wouldn't listen to reason. My dad tried to explain that he just wanted to do his job, but the priest kept saying, "You don't understand. The war is over. God is done with you. You must all die." He was even more agitated than before, and he was spitting and foaming at the mouth. At that point, my dad and the others realized he was insane. The priest suddenly stood up and ran out of the office. He ran outside and jumped into a foxhole. Dad said he wasn't going to hurt himself. He just wanted them to join him. He shouted, "Come on, join me. It's all over. God has left you. Come on, join me." The officers came out and tried to pull him out, but he dug his heels in and wouldn't budge. They finally pulled him out, but he just ran to another foxhole. This continued until he was finally shot by one of the officers. When the coast was clear, my dad and the others returned to the office. There was a pile of papers on the desk. They were orders for the priest to be picked up and taken to a psychiatric hospital for observation. Apparently, the priest had gone insane and killed 12 people at a small farm while they were praying. He had used a pitchfork and stabbed each person in the chest while they were sleeping. After reading the orders, Dad and the others thought that was the end of it. But the next day, they received new orders. They were to report to a different location because the Germans had advanced and they needed all hands on deck. When they arrived at the new location, they were greeted by a captain they knew. They asked him about the priest, and he replied, "Ah, you were too late. He killed himself last night. He must have gotten loose and was found dead in a foxhole this morning. No note or anything. That should have been the end of it." But that evening, as they were eating dinner, the door to the mess hall opened and in walked the priest. Everybody stopped eating and stared at him. He walked up to the table where my dad was sitting and said, "I told you. I told you. I warned you." And he stabbed my dad in the chest. Everyone screamed, and the priest fell on the floor bleeding. Someone grabbed his bayonet and jammed it into the priest's chest. The priest looked down at the bayonet sticking out of him and calmly said, "I told you. I told you. I warned you." And he died. That was the last my dad ever saw of the priest. He was shipped home shortly after that, and the priest was never mentioned again. But every once in a while, my dad will wake up in a sweat in the middle of the night having just had the same dream. He dreams that he is back in that mess hall and the priest is standing over him with a bayonet. And that was the true horror story of the priest. Do you believe in ghosts? Let me know down below. Also, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you want to hear more terrifying tales, then be sure to subscribe. Until then, I'll see you guys around.